So we have been talking about the need to consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and we argue that this consecration has not been done. Now, one of the most striking historical events that demonstrates that the proper consecration of Russia was not fulfilled is to contrast the effects of the 1984 consecration of the world by Pope John Paul II with the Portuguese consecration of Portuguese consecration of Portugal in 1931. The Patriarch of Lisbon at the time, the eminent Cardinal Catejeda, he said that what took place in Portugal in the 1930s and the 1940s is a sample, a preview of what Our Lady has prepared for the entire world when Russia is consecrated to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Here's what Cardinal Catejeda said. He said, "What has taken place in Portugal proclaims the miracle, and it foreshadows what the Immaculate Heart of Mary has prepared for the world. The dramatic consecration to the Immaculate Heart of Mary demonstrates the great power of Our Lady, and it demonstrates her fidelity in fulfilling her promises. The bishops of Portugal consecrated their nation to the Immaculate Heart of Mary on May 13th, 1931. And the effects wrought by this consecration were so spectacular that Frere Michel of the Holy Trinity calls Portugal at this time the showcase of Our Lady. It seems that Our Lady used Portugal to show on a national level what she will do worldwide when the Pope, in union with the world's bishops, consecrates Russia to her Immaculate Heart. Thanks to this 1931 consecration, Portugal experienced a threefold miracle. First, there was a magnificent Catholic Renaissance, a great rebirth of Catholic life. Second, there was the miracle of political and social reform. And third, there was the miracle of peace, in that Russia was preserved from the communist terror, especially from the Spanish Civil War, which was raging right next door, and also Portugal was preserved from the devastations of the Second World War. Cardinal Catejeda, on May 13, 1942, did not hesitate to attribute to Our Lady of Fatima the great graces that she had obtained from Portugal at this time. Here's what the Cardinal said: "To express what has been going on here for 25 years, the Portuguese vocabulary has but one word: miracle. Yes, we are convinced that we owe the wonderful transformation of Portugal to the protection of the Most Holy Virgin." So, first, we're going to talk about the 1931 consecration, and then we'll talk about the great graces that this consecration procured. Now, it was on October 13th, 1930, when the Catholic Church gave its solemn canonical approval to the apparitions of Fatima. This naturally aroused a great enthusiasm among the Portuguese people, and it was at this time that the bishops of Portugal, gathered around Cardinal Catejeda, decided to give a public testimony to their devotion to Our Lady of Fatima. And they decided that on May 13th, 1931, a great national pilgrimage of thanksgiving would be organized under the direction of the bishops of the country. And on that day, the bishops would solemnly consecrate Portugal to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Now, the bishops had actually made the decision to consecrate Portugal to the Immaculate Heart in January of 1931. They did this when they were all together on retreat. And interestingly enough, this retreat had been preached by Father Matteo Crowley, who is the great apostle of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And it's also been said that Sister Lucy herself inspired the idea of this national consecration. Now, in 1929, on the Feast of Christ the King, the Portuguese bishops had consecrated their nation to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So these bishops saw quite rightly that the consecration of the nation to the Immaculate Heart is a continuation and a completion of this first act. So, on May 13th, 1931, 300,000 of the faithful came to Fatima for the event. And if I may, I would like to read to you the beautiful consecration formula of these good bishops. It is really a tribute to the faith of the episcopacy of Portugal. Here it goes. The shepherds chosen by thy Son to watch over and feed in his name the sheep he has acquired at the price of his blood in this land of Holy Mary, whose name cannot be pronounced without pronouncing your own, come today as the official and consecrated representatives of their flocks, and in an act of filial homage, love, and trust, to solemnly consecrate the Portuguese nation to thy Immaculate Heart. Take it from our fragile hands into thine own. Defend it and guard it as thy own property. Make Jesus reign, conquer, and rule it. Outside of him, there is no salvation. Then the bishops speak of the imminent danger of the contamination from communism. They say, we, the pontiffs of your people, feel a terrible storm raging around us, threatening to disperse and destroy the faithful flock of those who bless you, because you are the mother of Jesus. Afflicted, we stretch out our suppliant hands towards your Son as we cry out, save us, O Lord, for we perish. Intercede for Portugal, O Our Lady, in this grave hour when from the east blows furious winds, bringing cries of death from the east against your Son and against the civilization founded on his teachings, deceiving minds, perverting hearts, and lighting the fires of hatred and revolution in the world. Help of Christians, pray for us. We can see that's dead aimed at communism. And I also find it edifying that these good bishops, not so long ago, were concerned with the preservation of Christendom. They spoke of an evil that brings cries of death against your Son and against the civilization founded on his teachings. Then the bishops turned their attention to the growing breakdown of morality in society. Intercede for Portugal, Our Lady, in this troubled hour when the unclean waves of open immorality, which has even lost the notion of sin, exalt the rehabilitation of the flesh in the face of the very cross of your Son, threatening to choke in this world the lily of virtue nourished by the Eucharistic blood of Jesus. Virgin most powerful, pray for us. Intercede for Portugal, Our Lady, in this hour of passions and doubt, when even the good run the risk of being lost. Unite all the Portuguese people around your Son in the love of the Church, and also in the cultivation of virtue and respect for orders and fraternal charity. Queen of Peace, pray for us. Remember finally, patroness of our country, that Portugal once taught so many lands to proclaim you blessed among all women. In remembrance of what it once did for your glory, O Lady of Fatima, save it by giving it Jesus, in whom it will find truth, life, and peace. We can see it's a beautiful prayer, full of faith. And Our Lady, in response to those bishops fulfilling her request so exactly, she accomplished what is called the threefold miracle for Portugal that I had mentioned earlier. As I said, there was a magnificent Catholic Renaissance, a great rebirth of Catholic life. There was the miracle of political and social reform. And third, there was the miracle of peace. Now, for the bulk of this information, I'm relying on Volume 2 of the magnificent trilogy, The Whole Truth About Fatima, by Frere Michel. Unfortunately, it's not available in Spanish or Portuguese. It's in English and French. And there's a lot of details. I'm just going to give you some of the highlights. First, the miracle of conversion. That was the first of the triple miracle, a magnificent Catholic Renaissance. Now, this Catholic rebirth was so striking and so dramatic that even the people who lived through it attributed it unquestionably as the work of Our Lady. At this time, there was a dramatic increase of priestly and religious vocations. For example, there were only 18 seminarians in the Diocese of Porto Alegre in 1917, but by 1933 there were 201. And diocese after diocese after diocese in Portugal tell the same story. The number of priests in Portugal increased more than 25%, and that was up until 1964 when things started to slide again. As for religious, their numbers almost quadrupled in 10 years, and the same ascending curve was noticed in the number of religious communities in Portugal at the same time. And lastly, there was a great renewal of Christian life, which showed itself in many ways, including the development of the Catholic press, Catholic radio, Catholic pilgrimages, spiritual retreats, and a great movement of Catholic action that was firmly integrated into the framework of the diocesan and parish life. There was at this time an association called the Pious Union of the Crusaders of Fatima, and they numbered about 550,000 members. And the people themselves were as fiercely anti-communists as they were devoted to the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary. And this Catholic Renaissance was so great that in 1942, the bishops of Portugal declared in a collective pastoral letter, they said, anybody who would have closed his eyes 25 years ago and opened them now would no longer recognize Portugal. So vast is the transformation worked by the modest and invisible factor of the apparition of the Blessed Virgin at Fatima. Truly, Our Lady wishes to save Portugal. Okay, so that's the first effect of the national consecration, a Catholic Renaissance in Portugal. Second, the second great miracle for Portugal was the miracle of political and social reform. Now, we have to remember that the bishops had consecrated Portugal to Our Lady so that she may save it from communism, which was taking root in Spain right next door. And around 1932, an uncompromising Catholic leader named Antonio Salazar came to be premier of Portugal. Salazar had been rising in government since 1929, and Salazar's goal was to put into practice a Catholic program that was counter-revolutionary. In fact, Salazar received a special blessing for his work from Pope Pius XII. Here is Pope Pius XII speaking. He said, "I bless him with all my heart, and I cherish the most ardent desire that he may be able to complete successfully his work of national restoration, both spiritual and morals." Now, as I said, Salazar's program was a Catholic counter-revolutionary program. He called communism the greatest threat, the greatest heresy, rather, of our time, and he strove with all his might to fight against it. He was a fierce opponent of socialism, liberalism, and to use his words, he was opposed to everything which diminishes, divides, or dissolves the family. He said, "For me, I only have one goal. What I plan is to make Portugal live normally. We want to preserve at any price from the tidal wave that is inundating the world simplicity of life, purity of morals, gentleness of sentiments, the equilibrium of social relations, the modest but noble atmosphere which is proper to Portuguese life." And very simply, his goal was to establish a Catholic social order where states and governments and social institutions will base their laws of right and wrong on what the gospel teaches is right and wrong, and on what the church teaches is right and wrong. And in this process, Salazar dissolved Freemasonry in Portugal in 1935. Salazar was keen to leave the Catholic Church complete and entire liberty of action. It permitted the Catholic religion to be taught in all schools, and non-Catholic parents who did not want their children to receive these instructions could be removed from the class. The Catholic faith was never forced on anyone. But throughout Portugal, the Catholic education of the young was greatly favored. Another remarkable development at this time was Salazar's legislation on marriage. I'll read the law. It said, "The Portuguese state recognizes the civil effects of marriage as celebrated according to canonical laws." And then he initiated into this legislation articles which frowned upon divorce. Article 24 read, "In harmony with the essential properties of Catholic marriages, it is understood that by the very fact of the celebration of a canonical marriage, the spouses renounce the legal right to ask for a divorce." So this was a law of the state that said that they cannot even, if they're engaged in a Catholic valid sacramental marriage, they cannot even ask for a divorce. And the effect of this law was not that marriages went down, but Catholic marriages went up, so that by 1960, nearly 91% of all marriages in the country were canonical marriages. I mean, can we imagine living in a land where 91% of all marriages are proper, canonical, sacramental marriages, and the couples going into these marriages know that they cannot even consider or ask for divorce? You see, that is a civilization of love, and it's nowhere to be found in our day. So, while many other countries throughout the world were plagued with communism and humanism and socialism and revolution, Salazar stood practically alone in establishing a nation that was, for the most part, based on Catholic social principles. So, we come to the third miracle. It was the miracle of peace, in that Portugal was preserved from communist terror, and Portugal was preserved from the Second World War. Now, it was well known at this time that Moscow's plan was to plant communism in Spain, because if they did this, then Europe would be bookended by communism, and it would had communist Russia on one side and communist Spain on the other, and it could close in. Now, close in on Europe on both sides. Now, the Portuguese bishops, they were watching this very carefully. They were watching the events in Spain. They were afraid for Portugal. So, on May 13th, 1936, the bishops met together and made a secret vow. They vowed that they would lead a national pilgrimage to Fatima in 1938 to give solemn thanks to our Blessed Mother if she obtained for Portugal victory over communism and the benefit of peace. Those are Cardinal Quedajeda's words. And on July 13th, 1936, just 2 months after their vow, there was the assassination of the monarchist deputy Calvo Sotelo, which marked the beginning of the Second World War. And as Frere Michel points out, the threat to Portugal was very grave. Humanly speaking, it seemed inevitable that the revolutionary contagion would just sweep into Portugal. But it never did. Now, it could have, and it almost did. For instance, on September 8th, 1936, 2 Portuguese ships mutinied to join the communists in Spain. And as soon as Salazar heard this, he gave the order that the ships be bombarded until they either surrendered or sank. Now, when Salazar did this, he received the full backing of the bishops of Portugal. So it wasn't long before the mutineers came to their senses, and afterwards the bishops wrote about the event. They said that, this is their words, a revolutionary movement got underway, which was quickly snuffed out. Thus Portugal could continue in tranquility on the path of work and progress. So, one major disaster was averted, and almost a year later there was another. There was an attempt on Salazar's life. On July 4th, 1937, Salazar was on his way to a private chapel at a friend's house. And just as he stepped out of the car, a bomb exploded about 10 feet away. The bomb was hidden in an iron case. Now, and yet, the bomb left Salazar untouched, and it left his driver untouched, even though the poor chauffeur was rendered deaf from the explosion. And rather than be all shaken up, Salazar simply turned to those around him and said, calm down. And then he turned to his friend and he said, let's go to Mass. He just picked up where he left off. Now, had Salazar been assassinated, it would have thrown the country into great turmoil, which is, as you know, fertile breeding ground for communism. And the bishops acknowledged in a collective letter in 1938 that it was an act of God that preserved Salazar's life in this attempted assassination. So anyway, by 1938, General Franco in Spain was on his way to victory, and the danger for Portugal had finally been averted. So, on May 13th, 1938, when the bishops of Portugal fulfilled their vow and renewed the national consecration to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, Cardinal Quedageta acknowledged publicly that Our Lady of Fatima had spared Portugal the scourge of communism. Here's what he said. Since Our Lady of Fatima appeared in 1917, a special blessing of God has descended on the land of Portugal. Especially if we review the 2 years which have gone by since our vow, one cannot fail to recognize that the invisible hand of God has protected Portugal, sparing it the scourge of war and the leprosy of atheistic communism. And even Pope Pius XII was amazed that Portugal had been spared from communism. In an address to the Portuguese people, Pope Pius XII spoke of, this is his words, the red peril, so menacing and so close to you, and yet avoided in such an unexpected manner. Now, for Portugal at this time, one danger had passed, but there was another staring them right in the face. They had escaped the contagion of communism from Spain, but now the Second World War was about to break out. And on February 6, 1939, 7 months before the declaration of war, Sister Lucy wrote to her bishop, Monsignor da Silva. Sister Lucy told him that war was imminent, and then she told him of a magnificent and miraculous promise. She said, and this is a quote, in this horrible war, Portugal would be spared because of the national consecration to the Immaculate Heart of Mary made by the bishops. And Portugal was spared the horrors of war. The details are too numerous to go into right now. And on December 2nd, 1940, Sister Lucy wrote to Pope Pius XII, and this is interesting, told the Pope that Portugal is receiving special protection during that war that other nations would have received if the bishops would consecrate their nations to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Here's what she said. Most Holy Father, our Lord promises a special protection to our country in this war due to the consecration of the nation by the Portuguese prelates to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, as proof of the graces that would have been granted to other nations had they also consecrated themselves to her. So, we can see now why Fra Michele of the Holy Trinity calls Portugal at this time the showcase of Our Lady. When the bishops consecrated Portugal, there was the threefold miracle. First, the magnificent Catholic Renaissance, a great rebirth of Catholic life. Second, there was the miracle of political and social reform. And third, there was the miracle of peace. That Portugal was was protected from the communists in Spain and preserved from the Second World War. This threefold miracle that Our Lady accomplished on a national scale is something that she wants to do worldwide in a more magnificent manner. But it will not happen until the Pope, in union with the bishops of the world, consecrate Russia to her Immaculate Heart, as Our Lady of Fatima requested. So, this triple miracle of Portugal stands as a preview of how Russia and the world will look after the proper consecration of Russia. And this preview is helpful to us because it serves as a gauge by which we may judge the present. If we contrast the miracle of Portugal with the present condition of Russia and the world, we see it is obvious that the proper consecration of Russia is not yet achieved. We're going to look at these quickly, one by one. First, after the 1931 consecration, there was the Catholic Renaissance in Portugal, but since the 1984 consecration, Russia boasts no rebirth in Catholic life. The Catholic Church is still a minority religion in Russia. The largest religion in Russia is the schismatic Russian Orthodox. The next is Islam, followed by an assortment of Protestant sects. The Catholic religion in Russia only has the status of a sect among sects. That is, it is on the level with kooky minority religions such as the Moonies, the Mormons, the Quakers, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Hare Krishna, and the Church of Scientology. And I should mention here a fact that should be obvious, that the conversion of Russia that Our Lady of Fatima spoke about means the conversion of Russia to the Catholic faith. And this is not only a point of common sense, but it's also found in the testimony of Father Joaquim Alonso, probably the top Fatima expert of the 20th century. Father Alonso, who had many interviews with Sister Lucy, wrote in 1976, this is his words, "We should affirm that Lucy has always thought that the conversion of Russia is not to be limited to the return of the Russian people to the Orthodox Christian religions, rejecting Marxist atheism of the Soviets, but rather it refers purely, plainly, and simply to the total, integral conversion of Russia to the one true Church of Christ, the Catholic Church." That's Father Alonso. Now, on September 3rd of 2006, just a little over a month ago, no, not a little over a month ago, a little over almost a year ago, I should have said, United Press International reported that the Russian Orthodox Church says that there are now 5,000 sects in Russia, S-E-C-T-S, 5,000 sects, that involve up to 10 million people in that nation. A priest named Father Yevgeny Tremenkin, the deputy head of the Rehabilitation Center for Victims of Non-Traditional Religions and Occult and Sorcery Cults, says that his center has been continually approached by relatives of those who died in cult rites and whose property has been taken away from them by the sectarians. Father Yevgeny said, different sects target different sections of the population. Some aim at civil servants, while others at workers. Thus, Scientologists and Jehovah's Witnesses have gained the confidence of administrative and military and educational community. Oriental and Hindu philosophy has spread to the intellectually elite, but targets mostly the youth. So this is no conversion of Russia, especially when we contrast the present state of Russia with the magnificent rebirth of Catholic life in Portugal that was the result of the bishop's consecration. Second, following the 1931 consecration, there was in Portugal the miracle of political and social reform in accordance with Catholic social principles. But after the 1984 consecration of the world, there is no Catholic social reform anywhere in Russia. To the contrary, Russia just now boils with immorality and decadence. Over 24 years after the consecration of the world, Russia has the highest abortion rate in the world. Dr. Daniel Maurer, who spent 8 years in Russia, he says that statistically, the average Russian woman will have 8 abortions in their childbearing years. And Father Maurer believes that the percentage is actually higher. It's about 12 abortions per woman. He has spoken to women who have had as many as 25 abortions. The reason for these dreadful figures is that other contraceptive methods, which are immoral anyway, have not been introduced in Russia, nor are they trusted, so this leaves abortion as the cheapest method to limit family size. Presently in Russia, abortions are free, but live births are not. Contrast, in post-1931 Portugal, a Catholic head of state virtually outlawed divorce, but in post-1984 Russia, the divorce rate matches that of the United States, which means it is an extremely high divorce rate. Russia, as we heard yesterday, has the highest alcohol consumption in the world. Satanism is on the rise in Russia. The birth rate is plummeting, as we heard, and homosexuality is rampant in Russia. In April 1993, 9 years after the 1984 consecration of the world, Russian President Boris Yeltsin allowed homosexuality to be decriminalized. Homosexuality is now legal in Russia. Worse, Russia is now a leading world center for the distribution of child pornography. Here's what the Associated Press said, 2001, August 9. Russian law does not distinguish between child pornography and pornography involving adults, and treats the production and distributing of either as a minor crime, said Dmitry Chepchugov, head of the Russian Interior Ministry's Department for High Technology Crimes. Russian police often complain about the legal chaos that has turned Russia into an international center of child pornography production. Unfortunately, this is Chepchugov speaking, Russia has turned the world into a trash bin of child pornography. Then there is this disturbing news of Russia's recent highly immoral reality television program that Russian viewers are turning into by the millions. Millions of Russia are tuning into Russia's new and lewd reality television program, Zaskelklum, which is called Behind the Glass. Of this program, which was aired 3 times a day, one news service commented, Russia has made a pointed effort to make the show more risque than their Western counterparts. Now, I apologize for what I'm going to explain here. 6 young contestants in their early 20s, 3 male, 3 female, are locked up in an apartment with 60 cameras that film them 24 hours a day. All the activities are filmed and broadcast, including showers, everything, and worse. It's an X-rated reality TV show with young couples engaging in highly immoral acts in front of the cameras. Mark Franchetti, in the November 24, 2001 London Times, reports that despite grumbles of disapproval from old hardline communists. The old communists are complaining about it. Russian viewers cannot get enough of this raunchiest version of reality television. Franchetti writes that the program boasts an audience share of more than 50%, and thousands of Russians have endured sub-zero temperature and queued up for more than an hour to catch a glimpse of it through a window of the flat. Millions have logged on to the website, which has crashed under the frequent weight of traffic. Now, the final example I'm going to give is so gruesome that I hesitate to discuss it. But we must, if we want to get a true state of the affairs in Russia at the moment. In early April 2005, border guards stopped the train entering Russia from the Ukraine and confiscated a mule carrying 25 frozen human fetuses hidden in 2 vacuum flasks. The mule's owner claimed he had bought these fetuses from a medical research center, but the man's story was not true. This gruesome cargo, in fact, was aborted babies from girls and young women that are being exported from Ukraine for use in illegal beauty treatments, costing thousands of dollars. It is thought, says the Observer, that women in the former Soviet Republic are being paid 100 pounds a time to persuade them to have abortions, to persuade them to have abortions and to allow their fetuses to be used in treatments. Most of the fetuses are sold in Russia for up to 5,000 pounds each. Some are paid extra to have their abortions later in the pregnancy. The fetuses are cryptogenically frozen and passed on to beauty salons. The Observer reports beauty salons in Moscow that buy the aborted material to provide fetal therapy are flourishing, despite a Russian ban on all commercial treatments using human cells other than bone marrow. The salon offers injections of stem cells, the undivided cells, present in embryos that can adopt into any kind of tissue, although they are still at the trial stage worldwide. And even though abortions performed more than 12 weeks into a pregnancy are restricted in the Ukraine, these later abortions are encouraged because of the alleged curative powers from the older aborted babies. It's thought to be greater, the curative powers. The process also involves corrupt doctors. When a doctor wants a fetus to sell, says a Kiev policeman, he tells a girl there is a medical reason for an abortion later than 12 weeks, so he lies to the girl. The woman would be paid to wait until a later stage in her pregnancy, and she might not even know that she was duped. Her aborted baby would be passed to a middleman or institution which, the Observer reports, would be cut into separate organs before placing them in storage. The body parts are then sold and taken abroad. Though injection using fetal cells are banned in the Ukraine and Russia, they are widely available in the salons and charge up to 10,000 pounds. Wealthy clients are told that the treatment can stop the aging process and eliminate such debilitating conditions as Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's. One fashionable Moscow clinic promised to take 10 years off your face by using these aborted fetuses. And Professor Vladimir Smirnov, director of Moscow's Institute of Experimental Cardiology, said, "We are talking about a huge, corrupt, and dangerous trade in quack therapies, and Russian law enforcement against this ongoing abomination is notoriously lax." So, would anyone in their right mind consider this to be the conversion of Russia? Would St. Padre Pio, would St. Maximilian Kolbe, would St. Teresa of Lisieux call this the triumph of the Immaculate Heart? To call what I have described the triumph of the Immaculate Heart promised at Fatima. To call it that, it is blasphemy. So the third and final point, very quickly, as a result of the 1931 consecration, Portugal was granted a miracle of peace. It was spared the horrors of the Spanish Civil War and World War II. By contrast, after the 1984 consecration, there is no peace. The promise of peace to follow the proper consecration of Russia is not going to be for Russia alone, but for the entire world. Our Lady said a certain period of peace will be granted to the world. Now, there's no need to propound at length on the dearth of peace, especially in light of the September 11th attacks in the United States. This was worldwide news. What is called the worst terrorist attack in history will not be one of the defining moments of the triumph of the Immaculate Heart. The constant war in the Middle East and elsewhere is proof enough, and we are in no period of peace because the consecration has not been accomplished. But that does not mean that in the meantime we do nothing, we just sit around and wait. We can still make consecrations to Our Lady's Immaculate Heart. The graces are there for the taking. Now, I am a layman, and I certainly cannot tell bishops what to do. I can't tell priests what to do. But I will tell you what I would like to see happen. I would like to see bishops consecrate their dioceses to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, to join with their fellow bishops and consecrate their nations to the Immaculate Heart. I would like to see priests consecrate their parishes to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. I would like to see priests and bishops enthusiastically promote the full Fatima message and make this message central to their lives. I would like to see husbands and fathers consecrate their families, their homes, and each one of their children individually to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, so that she may preserve and protect them, hopefully, the way she did the nation of Portugal. I would like to see individuals consecrate themselves to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and to live this consecration by obeying Our Lady of Fatima's requests, daily rosary, 5 First Saturdays, making sacrifices for sinners, and offering their daily duty to God as an act of sacrifice. Finally, and most importantly, I would like to see, and I pray every day that I see, that the Pope, in union with the world's bishops, consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, so that we may see her triumph, which will be the peace of Christ in the kingdom of Christ. Thank you for your attention.